Hello and welcome back to a new video. Today I'm working on another art challenge. So I've been joining into a craft challenge for this channel, Boylei Hobbytime, who makes super cool dioramas and projects, so go check it out. But yeah, I've been joining for a few months and it's been super fun, but this month's prompt kind of threw me off a bit. The prompt was off-road vehicle, which wasn't the most exciting idea for me, so I tried to get creative. My mind went to some kind of post-apocalyptic machinery. When I think of off-road vehicle, I think of those off-road Jeeps, and so I thought I'd start there. I had this idea of a post-apocalyptic world where everything is in ruins and there's this character wearing a mask and flowing robes who goes around collecting garbage and scraps in order to survive, and it would be like a Mad Max kind of aesthetic, so I worked on that idea a little bit. I worked on the composition. I thought maybe this character is standing facing his car, and then I thought it would be cool to have him sitting on a rock and his clothes would be blowing in the wind around him. And I really liked that idea, so I finalized this sketch. And then for the vehicle, I kind of veered off the original idea and I decided to change the car into a mechanical robot animal. And I kind of just figured out the design as I went and didn't really plan. And it turned into like this bull lizard creature with a saddle for the character to sit on, and then bags of scraps and stuff he's collected on its back. And I thought maybe this character could be a mechanic of sorts, and he's collecting scraps to build and fix this vehicle that he's built for traveling. And I was really happy with it, so I did some shading and finalized this sketch, and I created a background with a city in the distance and this huge dust storm, and I really loved it, so I just got started on the lightbox. First up is the robot creature, and since my sketch was very planned out, I just traced all the pieces I needed instead of redrawing everything just to make it a little quicker and easier for me. So I traced and cut out the main body layer and I added lines to represent the metal plates that create the kind of scales on the body, and then I created rivets by using a pin to poke holes on either sides of the panels, and I did this for the whole entire body. Then I moved on to the head. Again, I traced the shape and then drew all the details. Then I cut everything out like before. I also added this little dream catcher thing on one of the horns that matches a scrap collector's staff, just to tie the two characters together. And now on to the legs. I really wanted to make the creature kind of 3D, so I cut out all the separate elements and layered them with spacers to give depth. That's why I cut out everything separately. But yeah, all the legs are really similar, and for the feet, I made them like little clawed hooves to help move over the rough terrain and the sand. Then I moved on to the accessories like the saddle and then the packages on his back. I sketched everything out and I cut the pieces. The saddle was very simple, and then I just cut a stirrup separately and then I glued it on later. Then all the packs and the boxes on its back were basically just random shapes, so those were really easy to cut out. Moving on, I wanted to capture the look of my sketch more, so I decided to add shading from the sketch onto the creature. I achieved this by taking cardstock and cutting out the shapes of all the shadows and then gluing them in place on the back side of the main pieces so they wouldn't be visible, but they would still create shadows when the light is behind it and it shines through. I shaded the entire back leg and kept all the shadows consistently on one side so the light source would make sense and it would be cohesive. And now it's time to assemble this machine. The head and two forward legs got attached to the front of the body with a little bit of foam board as spacers, and then the back legs were attached to the back of the body. Then I used that same technique with the foam board for the saddle and the packages, and they are just attached in their places as well. Then I created these little thin reins that I just glued onto the saddle and then the other end onto the beast's mouth. And here's how it turned out, and it looked good, so I just moved on to the scrap collector. I also wanted to make him more dimensional, so I did the same technique with the layering. And again, I traced the main body that sits on the rock is one layer, and the cloak is in two parts but on separate layers. I wanted the body to be pretty dark, so I just did minimal cuts and details. I was really excited about this design because I like this gas mask that I put on him. Maybe the dust blowing around is very toxic, or it's just super dusty and he has to wear a mask to be able to breathe. Maybe he's a cyborg of sorts, or maybe he's even a robot himself. Who knows? I also gave him a staff. I just thought a prop would be cool and I haven't thought of a purpose for it yet. So for now it is just a prop, but I still think it looks cool. And I just glued all the pieces together and I added some shading like I did before. And here's how this guy looks, and he looks good. So now I move on to the actual layers and the background. I wanted to add more details to this world, so I decided to add the city in the background. Lately, I've been super inspired by really dark aesthetic artwork and like super gothic, very angular, sharp, just shapes and lots of darkness. And I wanted to capture that similar vibe, so I created this distant city with lots of vague tower shapes all shrouded in this huge dust storm. I made two layers to the city to add a little more depth, and I made a bunch of clouds. I started off with some clouds in front of the city to cover it a bit, and then I go into the background and make three layers of clouds getting bigger and bigger the further back they go. I also cut like another cloud line into the clouds to add a little more detail to them. And I'm gonna say this now, but I really love how this turned out. I don't know why, because it's very simple, but something about how the city stands in the clouds is just really pretty to me, and it's definitely my favorite part of this whole entire lightbox. And since that's all for the background, I start working towards the front, and I keep these layers very simple because my characters are going to take up a lot of space, and I didn't want to crowd it. I also made sure to cut some holes out of sight for some more light to pass through so it wouldn't be so dark. Alright, and now that all these boring layers are done, it's time to assemble. So I get some foam board and I cut the strips and I start layering. And now on to the final step, gluing in the characters. I started by placing my characters and immediately I ran into a problem. I hated the composition. The characters looked too big, and no matter how I arranged them, it just looked too cramped, and the city, which was my favorite part, was completely blocked, and it just looked really janky and crowded and weird no matter how I arranged it. But I tried my best and I glued them in place and I was just done with it, and I started editing this video, but then I just couldn't stop thinking about how much I hated it when I was so excited for it in the beginning, and I just felt embarrassed to post something that looked so bad, so I went back to try to fix it. So I go and I painfully cut out the characters and I tried rearranging them in different ways, but it still wasn't working for me, and then an idea came to me. I thought I could make the scrap collector sit on the creature's back, and that way he was more visible and he was framed against the blank sky so he would stand out more, and then the city would show as well because it would be less busy on the ground, and I could add some metal scraps all over the terrain to really sell the idea that he's a scrap collector, and it would add more details. So I went with that idea. And with that plan, I created a new version of my character and I glue him in place. Basically, he's just sitting cross-legged on the back of the creature. He still has his flowing cape and his staff, but he just looks a lot better. And I made him a little smaller so he wouldn't feel so big and weird. And for those scraps, I just drew some random bits and bobs, gears, pipes, metal plates, and other junk, and then I cut and glued those in place as well. I tried to add some details that were similar to the creature so it looked like he'd picked those parts up from the ground, you know what I mean? But once that was all done, I glued in the main characters and it was done. And I am so incredibly happy with it. I'm glad I went back to change it because I love it now. This green light over the city makes it feel creepy and dangerous, and then the reddish orange contrasts that to create a harsh feeling. But yeah, let me know what you think. If you enjoyed my video, please subscribe. It would mean the world, and I'll see you next time. Bye!